All right, so let's start with the big story that we are tracking on WION at this hour. Just hours before the people of Taiwan choose their next president and shape the future of their sovereignty, China has warned that it will smash any efforts to promote Taiwan's independence. Now, the warnings have overshadowed the contest that an anti-Beijing candidate is leading.
The Democratic Progressive Party authorities, for their own selfish interests, spend the hard-earned money of Taiwanese people to buy weapons from the United States. This cannot stop the trend of complete reunification of the motherland and will only push Taiwan into a dangerous situation of war. The People's Liberation Army always remains on high alert and will take all necessary measures to resolutely smash all forms of separatist plots for Taiwan independence and resolutely safeguard national sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Now, all this, of course, comes as the ruling DPP is seeking a third consecutive term in office. The party has fielded the current Vice President, Lai Ching-te, as its candidate, but he only has a slim lead over his main opposition, Hoi Yu-yi. And also remember, no party in Taiwan has managed to win 3 straight terms since the island's transition to democracy in the late 1980s.
I still don't know who to vote for. I feel that none of the candidates are good enough for me to have the urge to vote.
Hundreds of thousands attended the final pre-election rallies hours before they cast their vote. The candidates made their last appeals. The campaigning is all set to end shortly at midnight local time. The frontrunner Lai has said that the world is in fact watching as to how Taiwan votes, but the global tussle for power has overshadowed voter sentiment. Now, all those who are above the age of 20 can actually cast their vote, but many young voters say that China isn't their biggest concern. Domestic issues like affordable housing, the gap between the rich and the poor, and also the issues such as unemployment are at the forefront as well. An estimated 19 million people are eligible to vote, but Taiwan's voter turnout has declined by nearly 15% since the early 2000s. And the drop is particularly severe amongst the younger voters. The question, of course, is this: will this election now mark a big difference? But of course, find out when polling begins at 8 a.m. local time in Taiwan tomorrow. And to give us more perspective in terms of how these Taiwan elections, of course, play out, we're being joined by Mr. Hanno Klink, who's a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for East Asia and is joining us on this broadcast. Now, Mr. Klink, this is going to be a very crucial election. Now, China has, of course, gone on and dubbed this election as a choice between war and peace. Now, as the United States happens to be an important backer of Taiwan, how does the United States view this rhetoric coming out of Beijing for an election in Taiwan?
Well, good morning from Washington, and thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this very important discussion. The election in Taiwan is obviously a historic moment. It gives the Taiwanese people an opportunity to give their voice to their future. And it's also a message to the international community that democracy is very vibrant in Taiwan, as opposed to, for instance, in the People's Republic of China. Now, I do not see this as a choice between war and peace. I think that that's just an example of dangerous rhetoric coming out of Beijing. The United States government certainly does not have a favorite in terms of who is to win the election. I think the United States government, as well as the Taiwanese government, will have good relations regardless of who the president is in Taiwan. And that's because, for something very fundamental, we share common interests and common values. Interests in terms of stability and peace and a free and open Indo-Pacific, and values in terms of freedom of choice, freedom of expression, everything that democracy implies, which, again, is not present the People's Republic of China.
You know, it's interesting how this election is being played out. On the one end, there's this heightened rhetoric that's being witnessed in Beijing, but there are those within Taiwan who say probably the domestic issues dominate for them. In your assessment, what do you think is playing in the minds of the voters in Taiwan? Are they looking at the domestic issues that they are battling with on their home front, or this kind of heightened rhetoric from across the Taiwan Strait is the one that is actually playing in their minds as they step up to vote tomorrow?
I believe that your average Taiwanese voter is just like a voter in any other democracy. They're concerned about their future, their children's future. So economics and opportunity are predominant on their mind. And that means, again, as like the issues that you mentioned in your introduction, unemployment, the cost of housing, inflation, just general economic issues, household, or as we would say in the United States, kitchen table issues that resonate with voters in all democracies. All that being said, the relationship with the mainland is something that looms large. On the one hand, the Chinese consistently have used economic coercive means to try to interfere and influence Taiwanese elections, usually candidly having the opposite effect. On the other hand, I think your average Taiwanese citizen thinks we are an independent nation. Taiwan is an independent country in their perspective. And this issue of a choice between war and peace does not necessarily resonate with them.
And my final question to you, Mr. Klink, is this. Now, the issue of election interference is a pretty big one. And this is something that the United States in its elections has been dealing with, and elections in other parts of the world as well. Now, in the context of the Taiwanese election, how much of a concern do you think that is likely to be? Because a lot of people, in fact, turn around and say that, Xi Jinping has said that the Taiwanese issue, making Taiwan a part of China is a historic inevitability. That is how he's defined it. Do you think the Chinese would want to, somehow try get a favorable government in Taipei and by that try assimilate Taiwan into its own territory? Or do you think it's a military invasion that China is looking at?
So I certainly believe that Xi Jinping and the Communist Party of China has a favorite candidate in the Taiwanese elections. I think it's very clear that if the KMT candidate were to be elected president, that's what Beijing would favor because they have a more conciliatory policy towards the relationship with mainland China. All that being said, again, when Xi Jinping talks about this inevitability of unification, he's speaking mostly to a Chinese mainland audience, in my opinion, because this is something that has been a talking point of the Chinese Communist Party for decades, that they cannot walk away from. They cannot show any type of concession on this specific issue for their own domestic reasons. With respect to a military conflict in the Taiwan Strait, it would be a disaster for the entire world. But I think it would also be a disaster in particular for mainland China, because it is not a foregone conclusion that they could win. The conflict in Ukraine has demonstrated the resiliency of a people that value and prize democracy to the lengths that they will go to fight and protect those rights.
Very interesting. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Kling, for joining us and getting us that perspective there from Washington.
Thank you.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.